All right, yeah. So, do you want to start, just talk a little bit about kind of how you got to involved in the American Solidarity Party and in, pushing for these kind of reforms? Did you ever feel like you affiliated with either of the major parties, or was it kind of a transition for you?
So it was a long transition for me. I'll give you the the briefest overview I can, but we're going back, more than 20 years. So my upbringing was in the Democratic Party. My father was involved in the Democratic Party professionally. He was the uh, the chair of our county's central committee when I was growing up in California, Northern California, is Delmar County. And he was later the chair of the executive board of the district, the first district, which encompasses several northern coast counties in California. And I had Congress people at my house when I was a kid. I, went to the 1996 California State Democratic Party convention. Bill Clinton was there and spoke there. He stayed at the hotel that I stayed at. Um, I grew up around politics. My dad was a union guy. He was a union iron worker, retired now, but a long history of sort of left, leaning Democratic Party politics. And I also grew up in church, and I probably took that more to heart than either of my parents. But I did grow up in a Baptist church in California, and so it was fairly theologically conservative. And so I had this uh, odd kind of upbringing in a way, in that I was in a theologically conservative church, I would say, but also, grew up with a father who was politically left of center. And in some respects, even though I'm Protestant, I sort of recreated Catholic social teaching accidentally with my upbringing. I was theologically conservative, um, have really only grown more theologically conservative over time, but also politically leftist. And so I tend to be more socially traditional, on issues like abortion, that kind of thing, but also um, very much to the left on everything else, pretty much. And I wanted the Democratic Party to move left on those kitchen table issues as I grew up. I didn't really know how to make that happen, but I did in my first race that I was involved in as an adult, a legal adult, that is. I was 18 years old in the year 2000, and voted for Ralph Nader for president. And in retrospect, I'm very proud of that vote. I think that it was the right thing to do in that election. But my father, who's a vote blue no matter who
Yeah.
Democrat, when he found out about that, was not very happy with me about that. And in retrospect, I'm happy with that vote, and it sort of presaged things that came much later in my life in terms of independent politics. But I was not intellectually prepared to argue against intellectual and very emotional arguments that my dad was making against that vote at the time. And so it kind of cowed me back into the Democratic Party fold. I would just vote for the most progressive candidate that I could find in a primary, and then whoever was the Democrat in the general election, I voted for that person. I voted for a couple local Republicans that I knew personally. After I moved to Kentucky, people that were in my church or whatever that were running for office. But for the most part, I did not and still do not like what's going on in the Republican Party. And so, even though, like, ostensibly on paper, I agree with some Republicans on social issues, it never overcame the idea that I like vehemently disagreed with them on everything else. And I also found that, especially at the national level, not so much at the like ground level activist Republicans or whatever, or just regular people that happen to be Republican that I knew in church. At the national level, they mostly didn't really care about the social issues. They used them as a wedge issue in order to get people to vote for them. And I didn't like that at all. And so I would rather somebody like tell me I'm pro-choice than
Yeah.
have somebody tell me I'm pro-life and not actually be pro-life. And they're just trying to get my vote. So that was where I stood on it up until fairly recently. And 15 years go by after 2000, and Bernie Sanders comes along in the Democratic Party primary. And I finally had somebody for president who was running for president who I really believed in his politics. I really thought that, even though, again, I'm pro-life and he's decidedly not, and ever since that race, I've moved kind of in many ways further to the left than him on kitchen table issues, and on imperial war policy issues. Um, that really started my reawakening into independent politics. And the way that the 2016 race played out and the way that subsequent races played out in the Democratic Party really made me disillusioned with the Democratic Party. The degree, the sheer number, really, of people that I loved going into 2015 that I couldn't stand by the end of 2016, just still astonishes me. And after that race, I really did no longer um, paid as much attention to mainstream media. I started getting into independent media, and started producing my own independent media. And then 2020 rolled around. And even though in the intervening period, I had actually worked for the Democratic Party in Indiana in 2018, in many ways, that made me even more disillusioned with the party, having worked
Yeah.
with the party. The Many of the younger people that I work with are, they're great people. They're just sort of caught up in that system. But um, I I loved that after that race, I got to work for a nonpartisan, issue-oriented group, and didn't have to, be a part of the Democratic Party. And then in 2020, I actually ran for office, for state rep in Indiana, where I lived at the time. And I'm running at the time as, a democratic socialist, libertarian socialist. By that point, I had sort of identified in that way. But again, I was pro-life and didn't really hide that fact. And so I didn't really fit in very well in either party. I felt weirdly pressured to change my views on social issues, even though there was no chance that I was going to win that race. And my views on social issues could have helped in that race because it was a very red district. And, toward the end of the primary, it was clear that Bernie was not going to win the primary. And as a normal voter, in 2016, I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. I voted for Jill Stein. And as a normal voter, I would have not voted for Joe Biden and would have obviously not voted for Donald Trump in 2020 either. So I didn't feel that my conscience would allow me to do anything as a candidate for office that I wouldn't do as a normal voter. And so even knowing that that would cause a lot of friction that was already existing there because of my politics with the local Democratic Party and probably with the state Democratic Party. But I did it anyway. I was very public about the fact that I was not going to vote for Joe Biden. And I made the point that my not voting for Joe Biden could have done, well for me in a normal race in that district, because most of them weren't voting for Joe Biden either. Granted, they weren't doing what I was doing, which was being independent and not voting for Donald Trump. But in any event, if COVID hadn't happened, I would have been able to knock on doors and talk to people directly. And I feel like I probably could have gotten some Republican crossover votes because of my views on issues.
Yeah.
But I had made a post at the time. There was a meme that made it very clear that I was not voting for Joe Biden. And I ended up getting several of the local Democratic activists upset with me over that. And one of them snitched on me to the county chair, who I had a really good relationship with up to that point. And, it was weird because I thought that I had a good conversation with the woman who ended up doing this.
Yeah.
And, I had made my arguments for why I was doing it. And, granted, also in Indiana, you could vote for Mickey Mouse and have the same effect on the Electoral College that my vote for someone besides Joe Biden would have, because Indiana was very strongly pro-Trump. And so there was, it was a safe red state. There was no reason per se to vote for Joe Biden there if you didn't believe in Joe Biden. And my argument again was that if you believe in Joe Biden, you like Joe Biden, that's what democracy is all about. Vote for Joe Biden. But don't tell people that don't believe in Joe Biden that they have to vote for Joe Biden, or vice versa. Don't tell people that believe in another candidate that they have to vote for this candidate that they don't like in order to prevent a candidate that they hate from getting into office. And so I was looking for a candidate. My normal go-to would have been the Green Party. And the more I looked into the Green Party candidate at the time, Howie Hawkins, the less I liked him. On paper, we agreed on a lot of issues, but the way that I looked at that race, it seemed like they had basically decided that he was going to be the nominee 4 years earlier. And I wasn't about to jump from what I perceived to be a rigged primary to a smaller rigged primary, even if I agreed with the candidate on any number of issues. And so for the first time in my life, I didn't know who I was going to vote for president. And so I'm looking for another candidate. I got very briefly, I talked back and forth with an independent candidate that was running who was from Indiana. She lived in Indianapolis, very nice lady, but her politics were not my politics. She wasn't really that dissimilar in my mind from a typical Democrat. And so, in that case, I might as well vote for Joe Biden. And so I'm looking for something else. And that's when I found the American Solidarity Party, which is a party that is, more socially traditional and more economically progressive. And that's where I am. I think where a lot of people are, actually.
Yeah.
And we get forced into these sort of boxes of you have to be all this one thing or all this other thing. There's a lot of Republicans, working class Republicans, that are not where the Republican Party is on economics, the National Party. They believe that wealthy people should be taxed more. They believe that that the economy should work better for working class people. A plurality to a bare majority of Republicans believe we should have Medicare for all. And this is with no real like lobby for that kind of stuff
Yeah.
at the national level in the Republican Party. Um, and there are many Democrats who are not socially liberal. And most people actually who identify as pro-choice believe that there should be some restrictions on abortion. But the National Democratic Party has moved increasingly toward a very narrow group of activists and donors who are extremists on the issue, that believe that there should be no restrictions whatsoever on abortion from conception to basically birth. And that's not where I am, and it's actually not where most people are, including most Democrats and most people who identify as being pro-choice. Now, most of them are not where I am. You know, but I am what is termed a consistent life ethic or whole life advocate. I believe that life should be protected from conception to natural death. So I believe in progressive economics, and so does my party. I believe that we should have a universal, free at the point of access healthcare system, and much better economic system for working people. I believe that we should make abortion unnecessary, not just illegal. And so that's where my party is. And that when I found that in a party, I gravitated toward it quite a bit. And I really like the fact that the party draws in people from many different backgrounds. I'm well to the left of the Democratic Party on most issues. I am pro-life, and I am a traditional Christian in terms of my theology. But the party itself is essentially where I am on all of those issues, and I get to vote for all of my values. And I found a party that I was not just like happy to vote for the candidate, but really enthusiastic to join and help them grow. And it is based on Christian democratic principles. It's not a confessional party, so we actually have a number of people in the party who don't identify as Christians, atheist, agnostic. We've got a guy who is actually an expat who lives in Europe, who is like neo-pagan. Just as long as you agree with our principles, we're down for whatever. I think that there are a number of people in the party who are Muslim, who are Jewish. I think that if the party were better known, we would appeal to a lot of different kinds of folks. But if you look at other countries, there are Christian democratic parties in those countries. In Europe and in South America are where they're primarily found. In Europe, they originated very similar to what our platform is now. In Europe, unfortunately, because these kinds of parties sometimes tend to draw in more people from the right than they do from the left. Over time, the party has drifted on the original economic message. And so they're to the left of like Republicans, where like a national Republican Party is, like the CDU, for example, in Germany. But in the CDU, Angela Merkel, who was the previous prime minister of Germany, is basically considered the left wing of that party. And we have in our party people who are former Republicans who are to her left on economic issues. And So when I got to the party several months, I don't know, it was like maybe 6 months after I joined the party, I felt like there needed to be a counterbalance to the potential for right-wing drift on non-social issues, on kitchen table issues. And so I co-founded with another gentleman, Bill Fleming, who runs our party's podcast, um, and was coming in sort of from the pro-life left as well. We co-founded the Liberation Caucus, which is a group that is designed um, to bring folks in from the left, and to be a place of camaraderie for people coming in from the left. When I joined, I found a lot of really receptive conservatives in the party to a person like me joining. I identified at the time as a libertarian socialist, but there were some people, a very small number of people, but there were people who were in sort of the conservative end of things that, in some respects, the way that they talked to me, it felt like they thought I was some kind of intrious Bolshevik plot to destroy the party or something. It was like sort of a McCarthyist mindset. And again, it was a very small number of people, but my concern was that if people were coming in from the left and were getting that sort of response, that there would be people who were not as thick-skinned as me and were not as committed to the party as me, and they might leave before we even knew that they were there. And demographically, we did do a recent survey, and we found that there are more people coming in from the Republican Party and the Libertarian Party than there are coming in from the Democratic Party, or from other left parties. And to a certain degree, that doesn't necessarily mean they're more conservative, because if you leave that conservative party, there must be a reason for that. But there are some people that have joined the party who are less to the left on economics than we are. And so again, over time, my concern was that that there would be drift, sort of natural drift, even without people intending it, over time, that could happen without there being a counterbalance. And in South America, because of the influence of liberation theology, there was sort of that natural counterbalance within some of the Christian democratic parties there. And so they didn't drift as much on economic issues as the European Christian democratic parties did. And so I wanted there to be that sort of counterbalance. And so we are that counterbalance. We have folks that have been in our caucus who have been involved in the party since long before I was. And we've been able to draw in a number of people from left-leaning circles. The main thing is that we always try to make sure that folks are pro-life, because I never want the party to drift on that issue. But other than that, we focus on economic issues, on healthcare policy, on peace and justice issues, racial justice issues, and trying to make sure that the party stays at least as progressive as it already is on those issues, if not moving, further and stronger on those issues. So that's why I started the caucus, and that's how I ended up in the Solidarity Party. I have since become a member of leadership in actually both states that I was in. Because the party is small, it's kind of funny. Like, so when I first joined, within a couple days, I was on the phone with the vice presidential candidate. I was on the phone with the national chairman. I got very enmeshed within the party in leadership. And again, because it's small, you're sort of able to get out on the ground level and really get involved in leadership, especially at the state level too, because we need those state leaders, and they're always looking for good folks to join. And for a hot second there, I was the chairman of the Indiana State Party. Um, and then I ended up moving back to Illinois, and I am now an at-large member of the Illinois State Leadership Committee, along with Tai Chi Kuo, who is our chair, and Amar Patel, who was the vice presidential nominee in 2020. He lives here in the Chicagoland area, and he's our vice chair. And Bill Fleming, the guy that I co-founded the caucus with, he is now on the the national committee, the Solidarity National Committee. And we've had a number of people who are on in the caucus, rather, who are on state leadership or have been in national or state leadership. And our goal is to get as many people involved in that sort of leadership at their state or local level as possible. And my hope, and I'm working to be a part of this in every way that I can, is that we start to build up that ground level operation in every state, so that we can actually get some folks on the ballot and get some folks elected locally. We actually have a few elected officials at the sort of local level. And I think that we are at a stage where if we really focused on a couple of key races around the country where demographics are favorable, that we could probably get a state rep elected. Definitely we could get judges, we could get city councilors, that kind of thing. And my hope is to build that over time. And then build up those state operations as best as we can, with folks coming into the party who have a little bit more professional experience in politics and aren't just interested in it as a side thing. So
Yeah, I think it definitely sounds like there's a lot that the American Solidarity Party can work with on the Forward Party, where I think we're aligned in a lot of the process type things. Saying, I love the idea of the American Solidarity Party, of this kind of taking pieces from the left and the right. And you're definitely right that there's a lot of Americans who are like that, don't fit into these two boxes. It's with 330 million people, you can't just have two categories. And so I love what I'm hearing about this. I think the American Solidarity Party kind of represents what the Forward Party wants for the future. We're saying we want 5 or 6 national parties. We want also focusing on local elections. That I'd love to hear that's where you guys are, putting your emphasis as well. Yeah, I think I'm really liking this kind of left right thing. And I wanted to get back to you mentioned voting for Ralph Nader and Jill Stein and getting some pushback from your father about that. So I wanted to talk about if that kind of changed your perspective on, the voting process or elections process. Because that's kind of the biggest thing the Forward Party is talking about, is saying, if we want these new third parties to emerge, we have to have voting reform that's going to eliminate that spoiler effect.
yeah.
So I was wondering, what your reaction to that and kind of your thoughts on, the pushback you got after that Nader vote.
Yeah, well, so it's funny because at the time there weren't as many people, I think. I mean, there were a lot of people that were very frustrated with where both parties were going, but because this predated a lot of like the social media aspects that have come out since then, it was harder for us all to get together and realize that there were more people like us out there than we thought. And I had done something at the time called Nader Trader, which involved like connecting with somebody online and in a swing state, and they were Nader leaning, but they were concerned that they might tip the balance to George Bush, and so they would pledge to vote for Gore as long as you in another state that was safe, either for Republicans or for Democrats, would vote for Nader, with the goal of getting him 5% national. I think that if you organize something like that, it could work now, but it's ad hoc. You know, it's like we're trying
Yeah.
to, as people, work around the system. I found it actually a better ad hoc version of that later in the 2016 race from a guy named Sam Husseini. And Sam had an idea called Vote Pact, where you would, as voters in the same state, um, one that was leaning toward the Republican candidate and would normally vote for a Republican, but didn't like the current Republican candidate, and then one that was on the other side, the normally would vote for a Democrat but didn't like the Democratic Party candidate. And in a presidential race, because of the Electoral College, you might be concerned about the spoiler effect. In most states, there is no spoiler effect. But if you're concerned about that, or if you just want to like make darn sure that you don't have any spoiler effect for yourself, if you pair up together and pledge to vote for a third party candidate, it wouldn't matter what party candidate you voted for. It could be any independent. It could be the same independent. It could be different independents. But you would cancel out the spoiler effect for your two votes. And mathematically, if more people did something like that, it would cancel the spoiler effect for them. And it's, again, a good ad hoc workaround, but
Yeah.
it doesn't actually solve the issue. And the thing that really bothers me is that neither major party is actually interested in solving this issue. They're interested in using the issue to keep their own voters, like
Yeah.
basically hold them hostage. The Democratic Party has complained vociferously about two elections, 2000 and 2016, in which they claimed that the Green Party swung the vote toward the Republican. That's dumb. Number one, because they're like, for example, in the year 2000, there were 250,000, somewhere around there, Floridian Democrats who voted for George Bush. Nobody ever blames those people for Bush, but there were 250,000 of them, orders of magnitude larger than the number of people in Florida that voted for Ralph Nader. I mean, you could make the argument that there were probably more people who stayed home in Florida and watched Golden Girls reruns than voted for Ralph Nader. And nobody's owed a vote. Like, it's your vote. It
Yeah.
belongs to you. And Green Party voters are not otherwise Democratic Party voters. Like, if you hold a gun to their head and you force them to vote for one of the major parties, they would hesitate and might take the bullet. They just do not like where the Democratic Party is. And if the Democratic Party candidate doesn't meet their minimum threshold, they're not going to vote for that candidate. Now, you can complain about that all you want, but the job of a elected official or somebody who's seeking elected office is to win votes on election day. If you can't do that, you're a crap politician and you don't get to complain about your voters. You could get every Green Party voter that you want if you just did a few very basic things that would make you like a decent human being, like supporting Medicare for all and supporting a Green New Deal and supporting a livable wage for people. So you could get most of those Green Party voters. if you wanted them as a Democratic Party candidate. But you can't get them if you want Wall Street money. And that's the problem, is that the Democratic Party wants to act as if they can both take Wall Street money and fix problems that are caused by people on Wall Street. And you can't do both. And they know that, but they try to tell their voters that they can do that. And they give you like the bare minimum of what would be necessary in order to placate you, not so much fix the problem. The other thing that bothers me about the spoiler effect is, at least in the Democratic Party, nobody ever mentions the Libertarian Party. And libertarians vote 2-1 for Republicans. So if we lived in this world that some Democratic Party politicians seem to want, where there are no third parties, or at least nobody votes for the third parties, then you'd have to take into account the Libertarian Party, and that makes it worse for Democrats. But again, they don't care about this issue in terms of fixing it. They prefer that we keep the spoiler effect because it keeps people in line.
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
There's just a couple more minutes left in here. I have to upgrade my Zoom apparently, but
sure.
But to that point, yeah, that's something Andrew Yang talks about. He says, he talks to some legislators in Washington, and they tell him an issue is worth more to us unsolved than it is solved.
Yeah,
because then we get to
that's true. That's true of issues that have nothing to do with electoral reform as well.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, there are many national politicians who claim to care about life issues or economic, whatever issue. Democrats that claim to care about healthcare policy, or Democrats like Joe Biden, who claim to be the most progressive a politician who was president since FDR, but then goes and pushes heavily this rail workers like strike breaking bill. So yeah, I mean, they don't actually care about those issues, and so much as they actually want to solve those issues. So that's where I like what the Forward Party is about, with really fixing those baseline structural problems that are preventing regular people. It's not just about third parties. This is just regular people who have different ideas about how to get things done. And they exist in both major parties, and they exist as independents. And we just want to fix problems.
Yeah.
And we're not able to fix those problems because of the way that the system is rigged against actually fixing problems. It's rigged in favor of making sure that rich people stay rich and everyone else fights with each other. So
yeah, I think that's exactly the problem we have to solve.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for doing this again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And a last thought I would just kind of leave you with is I really hope we can work together. The Forward Party is this different kind of thing where it wants the American Solidarity Party to succeed. We want other parties to succeed.
Yeah.
And so I hope we can work together to build that multi-party democracy.
I'm there for it. I love it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Holden.
Really appreciate it. I'll hopefully see you tonight on the Twitter space.
For sure.
All right. See you later.
Thanks, brother.
Bye.